Pamela is not victimized by Ted Bundy in the novel. He never attacks her. But Pamela is victimized by literally everybody else. Welcome back to the madness. My name is Erin, and today we are taking a trip down the road of true crime in today's novel, Bright Young Woman by Jessica Knoll. This is a feminist, fictional retelling of the story of Ted Bundy. Bundy, who, if you don't live under a rock, is an infamous serial killer that terrorized a lot of women in the late 70s? Yeah, late 1978. Yeah, the late 70s. Awful person, did awful things, and then the worst part about it was the fact that he got glamorized and romanticized. The women, the victims, their families' victims, kind of got victimized twice. Once by Ted Bundy and twice by the media uproar that sort of upheld this dude bro, Chattington, as the all-American sex killer. It's bad. Okay. There's a train doing its train thing, and I don't know if it'll pick up, but there is a train training. So, as always, to begin our journey into the depths of madness in discussing this book, we're first going to look at all of the metadata, everything that is surrounding this book before you even open page 1. This book was written by Jessica Knoll. She's a New York Times bestselling author, and for whomever finds it valuable, this book has a few nominations and an award. It won the Libby Award for Best Thriller. Libby is a digital media app used by libraries to manage their digital libraries. In fact, I read this book on Libby. Please support your local libraries. It's like one of the few public institutions we have left where it costs $0 to exist and are fundamentally one of the most important parts of a functional society. I know that Salem, Oregon is really struggling and is at risk of losing their library system. I'll have a link in the description of this so you can contact local officials in Salem, Oregon to make sure that they keep their library system because, again, like, the mark of a flourishing society is often how accessible knowledge is, and if, we strip the people of knowledge, we will be falling into a dystopic nightmare. I don't know if anybody read Fahrenheit 451. I don't want to live through that at all. Do you? I mean, the robot dog would be cool. But that's about it. I'm pretty sure that book ends with a bomb. Not to spoil Fahrenheit 451. Sorry. Support your libraries. Back to our regularly scheduled madness. Our audiobook had 4 narrators, and one of them is Broadway actress Sutton Foster. Fiona herself from Shrek the Musical. She does the performance of Anything Goes in whatever year she did that for the Tonys. I don't actually know. I've never watched Anything Goes, but I do like watching Tony performances because it's the only way I can see a Broadway quality level performance for $0 because they're all on YouTube. And I've watched the Anything Goes performance so many times. When I was like, Sutton Foster's doing this, I was like, Sutton Foster? She's doing this? That's amazing. There's also Imani Jade Powers, Corey Brill, and Chris Henry Kofi. These narrators gave the performance of their life. This is some of the best narration in audiobook that I've heard. I hope Sutton Foster does more. She really does have a pretty good voice. I can only name like 1 or 2 other audiobook narrators off the top of my head. I know Z Sands. I love Z Sands. This performance is elevated by the beautiful and well evocative prose by Jessica Knoll. I had a great time listening to this book. This is the first time I've ever really worn lipstick for more than 60 seconds, and I'm gonna be honest, guys, I don't really know how to drink anything with this on. You can tell I don't wear makeup very often. I don't judge a book by their covers. Not really, I don't. It's one of those marketing things that has just never gotten to me, but I do, in fact, judge them by their titles. I am such a judge you by your title girly. And let me tell you, Bright Young Woman, gorgeous novel. I keep calling it Promising Young Woman because there is a movie called Promising Young Woman, which, by the way, if you liked that movie, you'll like this book. And if you've read this book and you like this book, you'll like Promising Young Woman. So if I accidentally call it Promising Young Woman, I'm very sorry. They're very similar stories that handle similar topics. But Bright Young Woman is such a good title. And part of what makes it beautiful, part of what makes it work so well is the way that it connects to plot and theme. So if you're a true crime person and you're well acquainted with Ted Bundy, I would assume you immediately recognize what this title is paraphrasing. This is a quote that the judge said to Ted Bundy when he was giving down the conviction. The judge said that he was a bright young man. And so this title is sort of flipping that, kind of pushing Ted Bundy out of the spotlight and really focusing on the people who were genuinely affected by this travesty, the women. So I'm not really that into true crime. I listen to one podcast that does true crime, cryptids, conspiracy theories, and all that kind of stuff, and that's the only really time I engage with true crime. So I know who Tommy Patello is, and Ed Gein, and who's the other guy? Jeffrey Dahmer. I think they've done John Wayne Gacy. I don't remember all who they have done. But, every evil person in Wisconsin, these guys have probably done. It's the thing that we're, not a lot of people think about that we're known for, which is violent, memorable, violent crimes. I used to be, fairly fascinated in one particular case because it happened so close to my home. And then I read, two books, and then, shows like Criminal Minds took a way to interpret it as they were taking this real crime and then using it as inspiration for a fictional book. And I wasn't looking for these books. I found them because I like thrillers. I ultimately, after watching the TV episodes in these books, I kind of realized that it's kind of disgusted. Because they're fictional, they could take creative liberty on every single aspect. All of these versions really failed to capture the genuine horror of what the actual crime was. And I realized that I just didn't want to read any more books like that who were taking real life inspiration and putting their own spin on it. It just rubs me the wrong way. I ultimately think that reading books that take inspiration from true crime is much easier to do if you have no idea what the actual true crime that inspired it is. I think once you know what the actual crime is, you're just oh, she decided to stab herself? Are you fucking kidding me? That's disgusting. This is really to say is that when I put this book on my to be read, I did not know that it was a reinvention of a quote from Ted Bundy's case. With my little experience in true crime, I didn't know right off the bat that this was a reinvention of a quote from Ted Bundy. A reclamation I think is a better word over this phrase that absolutely does not belong to someone like Ted Bundy. But even with my lack of knowledge, as I'm a woman, I am of this generation that when I see a phrase like this, bright young woman, I immediately assume it is a reclamation of something that was said about a violent male offender. there's this disturbing dialogue about violent male offenders that try to sort of rebrand themselves as troubled but promising individuals with a future that shouldn't be ruined by the violent crime that they willingly committed. It's disgusting. And as a general rule of thumb, if you don't want to go to jail or prison or ruin whatever potential you might have had, maybe don't commit a crime. Maybe just don't. And then you won't ruin your potential. Newsflash, maybe if we just stopped committing felonies, all of these bright young men wouldn't have their potential wasted. Bright Young Woman, the title, is deeply entrenched in the book's narrative. There are layers to it that keep it very well connected. I could talk to you for hours about this title. And that, I think, is the mark of a very good title, is when it is very difficult to divide it from the work that it is associated with. Other books that are like this is The Catcher in the Rye, Little Fires Everywhere, The Hunger Games, Life is Strange, Across the Wide and Lonesome Prairie. When you ask what do these titles mean, people could write essays about the way it connects to the plot and the themes and the characters and all of the work that it is doing. In high school, one of the last essays that I wrote was how to title fiction, and then I spent the entire time arguing why The Catcher in the Rye was the perfect title for the book, how the book could have not been named in anything else, and why this title clues into the reader what is actually important about the book versus what people say is important about the book. My most problematic opinion is that The Catcher in the Rye is one of my favorite books, but it's not because I identify with Caulfield in any sort of edgy way. It's because it's about a boy whose brother died and he doesn't know how to deal with it, and nobody is going to support him because he's a boy in a society where he was told not to cry, so he has no idea how to deal with his emotions and is lashing out and is doing stupid things. And I think that's very sad. This is also why I get really mad when titles have to be changed, because especially if the title is doing a lot of work, it's like, why would you ever ruin perfection? Like, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo becomes a whole different novel when you learn that the actual title of that book is Men Who Hate Women. I have a lot more to say about titles, but we'll never finish, so we're just gonna leave this here. Bright Young Woman is a genius title. I'm thriving. Anybody who is a fan of Ted Bundy is gonna immediately clock. Did I just say a fan of Ted Bundy? Any true crime enthusiast will immediately clock this, that this is probably a Ted Bundy novel. Anyone who is very into feminist fiction will clock that this is probably a feminist fiction because the language is very familiar. It connects to every word. You can connect it back to the title, and I think that's really, really great. Shout out to Charming Book Covers on Instagram. They post they label which artist did these covers. So I'm happy to report that Caitlin Call is the artist, and our art director is Jaya Myceli. This stuff will all be linked in the description if you ever want to take a look at any of that stuff. I'm so happy that we found the artist this time. And we're going to go into my processor, and we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to talk about it. Obviously, I don't know if you could tell, I love the cover of this book. I made a t-shirt. I'll show you what it looks like. This is my shirt. And if you know, this is a song by Penelope Scott called Lot of True Crime. And this bridge is specifically about Ted Bundy. So I was like, I love this cover. I love this song. And then it's like, let's just put this all together in a t-shirt. Let's take a look at what is going on with this cover. We're going to be talking about color today. Look, can you see like the inspo and everything? It's great. I wish I had the skill to be able to do the yellow for here, but I use a Cricut, and there would be no way I would have been able to get that yellow on there. It's like the one thing that I'm like sad is that this had to be monochrome and I didn't get the yellow in, but it's fine. I will say that I don't love it when book covers are like, this is the author of this book. I assume that it's a marketing tactic that works. I just don't understand. I guess maybe now, like, I kind of want to read Luckiest Girl Alive. I hope that I would love to meet a marketing specialist in publishing and ask them why they do that and if it actually works. But anyways, oh geez, how do I talk about this cover? First of all, this part is great because it kind of looks like an old photo that has been photocopied over and over again. Like the way that the distress is happening, like in these sections, it kind of looks like something that has been photocopied over and over again. I feel like I would know what that looks like because I went to uni and half of the stories that they have you read in the creative writing programs at uni are photocopied from books, and so like I have seen this kind of distress over and over again. And I think that is cool because of the idea of like old story coming back to light is kind of what I like a photocopied look, kind of what that says to me. Because usually when you have photocopied things like this, it's because, you know, you've done the photocopy and you're taking it with you, and it's obviously something important. And then especially in like older photos, like it just, that's the vibe I get. I like the artistry of it. Obviously we have pink, and pink is still a very good way to indicate feminine, female, feminist novels, women, etc. like this. And I do like that they chose to do her skin tone in pink because we can sort of understand just visually that this is going to be from the perspective of a woman, given that we have this sort of pink color. And then the yellow eyeshadow just helps pop. Have down here at the bottom, bright young woman. This is also giving a sort of retro vibe. I was like looking down here for the font for Dead because I could not afford to just buy the font that this novel uses. I don't have $30 to spend for just a joke t-shirt. That I was looking in retro. And in fact, I think the other font that I picked is also a retro font. This is definitely giving a retro vibe. And obviously, we want it to have a retro vibe because this is a book about 1978. There is a modern section to it, but, you know, primarily we are in the 1980s at this point. And that really makes it stand out. It makes it look bright. Like when, like this novel, the woman, the colors, it says bright young woman. This book, in terms of its color, is also popping out. Yes, this feels like bright young woman. This is also not a very common color combination that I see, pink and yellow. So I really do love that this book kind of stands out in that way. I feel like pink and yellow is definitely like a color combo that I would see maybe in the 80s, but I wouldn't really expect to see it in modern day unless you're doing like a pastel, and these are clearly not pastels. So like I love that this book feels like it's older, that it looks like it's older, that it's distressed like a photocopy like it's older, and it's so good. And thematically, back again about the way that the image looks like it's been photocopied. Like, when you think about the idea of a viral story, of screenshots being shared around, of people talking about it, something getting photocopied over and over and over again would mean that people are talking about it, and it's a story that's going viral. And I feel like that's very true about Ted Bundy. So, like, thematically, you know, the photocopy sort of aesthetic is sort of indicating that this is about a viral story. This is about something that we are talking about over and over and over again. And every time we do, you know, we lose a little something along the way, and this novel attempts to bring some of that back. It's very good. It's very beautiful. So this is very long, so we're going to go through this together. We have, this is our sort of introduction, an extraordinary novel inspired by the real-life sorority targeted by America's first celebrity serial killer in his final murder spree. So that's not actually a part of the synopsis, that's just the part that's in bold at the top to be like, hey, this is what this is about. And I think it works pretty effectively. January 1978. We have a date. We love dates. Oh, I should also like real life sorority, first celebrity serial killer, and his final murder spree. I don't know if Ted Bundy is actually named in here. Thematically, they were doing this thing where they never wanted to say his name. So I don't actually know if I knew that this was Ted Bundy until I started reading. I'm not entirely sure what I remembered. I don't know. Let's keep going. The killer has terrorized women across the Pacific Northwest, but his existence couldn't be further from the minds of the vibrant young women at the top sorority on Florida State University's campus in Tallahassee. Tonight is a night of promise, excitement, and desire, but Pamela Schumacher, president of the sorority, makes the unpopular decision to stay home, a decision that unwittingly saves her life. Startled awake at 3 a.m. by a strange sound, she makes the fateful decision to investigate. What she finds behind the door is a scene of implausible violence. 2 of her sisters dead, 2 others maimed. Over the next few days, Pamela is thrust into a terrifying mystery inspired by the crime that captivated public interest for more than 4 decades. On the other side of the country, Tina Cannon has found peace in Seattle after years of hardship. A chance encounter brings 25-year-old Ruth Wachowski into her life, a young woman with a painful secret of her own, and the two form an instant connections. They were roommates. When Ruth goes missing from Lake Sammamish State Park in broad daylight, surrounded by thousands of beachgoers on a beautiful summer day, Tina devotes herself to finding what happened to her. When she hears about the tragedy in Tallahassee, she knows it's the man the papers refer to as the All-American Sex Killer. There it is. I like the way that this is phrased, how the papers refer to it. Determined to make him answer for what he did to Ruth, she travels to Florida on a collision course with Pamela and one last impending tragedy. Bright Young Woman is the story of 2 women from opposite sides of the country who become sisters in the fervent pursuit of the truth. It proposes a new narrative inspired by evidence that's been glossed over for decades in favor of a more saleable headline. That so-called brilliant and charismatic killer from Seattle was far more average than the countless books, movies, and primetime specials have led us to believe. That it was the women whose lives he cut short who were the exceptional ones. Okay, that's a lot there, and honestly, when it comes to a nonfiction-ish novel, I'm not really surprised. Obviously, we have some buzzwords like terrorizing women. That's pretty big. Because this is a dual pod, these are basically sort of plot indicators that we get Pamela's side of being the in the sorority and dealing with the sorority, and then the Tina side. That's another reason why I probably think it's this long, is because you kind of need to explain who Pamela is, and then you also kind of need to explain who Tina is. But honestly, like, I'm sure that you could get away crossing out the entire second paragraph, or most of the second paragraph, and just leave Ruth to be a sort of question that gets explored in the novel itself. I think this synopsis works. It's not like The Cabin at the End of the World where I was like, this is not doing this book justice. And I don't know how people who love this book, I don't know if they would also love this, but I think this is fine. I'm not complaining or anything like that. I think another thing here is what she finds behind the door is a scene of implausible violence. We are getting sort of indications of like world-shattering, life-altering events. And then down here is sort of kind of like a thesis almost. That this is what this book is trying to do, in that it is trying to give a feminist perspective on Ted Bundy. I said it when we were reading, but the papers refer to as the All-American Sex Killer. That Jessica Knoll is not condoning this, that it's very specific to say that it's like, this is what the papers are calling them, and what the papers are calling him is not really what he is. Like up here, the first celebrity serial killer. Like, that is something that Jessica Knoll is admitting, that he is this. She'll admit that he's the first celebrity serial killer, but she will not say that he is the All-American Sex Killer. That is just something what other people call him. That is just a very small, minute detail of nuance just in this paragraph that really, really indicates to you that Jessica Knoll is really attempting to platform the women in this story and deplatform the men. I think it's very effective. I think, this is also an indicator that this is going to be a very nuanced story, that she is paying attention to these very, very small details. Like, I don't think anyone would have noticed if it just said, she knows it's the all-American sex killer. I don't think many people would have noticed the difference or even cared about the difference. But the fact that she took the time to just add in those words says a lot about, like, her character, her intent. And I think character and intent, when it comes to a book like this, is very important because, this is true crime. This is a thing that really happened, and you want to make sure that if you feel like you have the voice to tell this story, I want to know what the intention is, because if it is to just make money, then it's going to be bad. And this nuance tells me that it doesn't seem to be about money. Now, I rated the novel concept 3, but I rated the execution 5. It means I had some issues on the overall concept and the way that this was structured, but despite that, I think it's very well executed. So, this is my problem, and you can't really classify this as autofiction because the auto in the word autofiction refers to autobiography. Autofiction is a genre in which people tell their life stories with fictionalized elements. It's stylistic, it's artistic, it's a fun genre. I've been trained on how to write in it. I recommend anybody, take your hand at autofiction. It's very fun. I suppose to classify this, we can use biografiction, meaning that, this is where biography meets fiction novel, because it is biography, but it is really more fiction than biography. It's an artistic leap that I've never seen done before, and I do love it on the grounds that the victims and the family of the victims of Ted Bundy also don't mind it. Because this is a real person who did real things that caused real trauma to real people, and I'm not willing to die on a hill that this book is good and interesting art if all of the victims and the victims' families are exploited by it. And I think by making it fictional characters, that this was a way to tell this story without exploiting the victims. But honestly, I can't really say that it is a good idea or a bad idea because I wasn't personally affected by this. I don't get to say that. So what I ultimately don't love about this whole setup, it's fine. But what I don't like about it is that there is no real indicator that it is fictional. That there are fictitious elements. We get inspired by, but then next to that we have real life sorority. And these are sort of conflicting words because it's okay, it's inspired by, but this is the actual sorority. So what's actually going on here? And then we have new narrative inspired by evidence that's been glossed over. So, is that real evidence? But it's inspired by. So we have some contradicting language that I don't think meant to be there. I don't think Jessica Knoll did this on purpose. But I just wish that, maybe up here at the top or maybe down here at the bottom that, you just put, this is, a fictionalized retelling of real events surrounding Ted Bundy. Even right now, if you go on to Goodreads, autofiction is not a label of a genre that you can put on there. I went and looked up Motherhood by Sheila Heti to see if it was labeled as autofiction, and it's not. So it's not entirely Jessica Knoll's fault, and it's not entirely the publisher's fault. It is kind of the fault of the databases that we use, in which that there's no real language to sort of indicate autofiction or biografiction. That's a word I just made up for this video, so of course it's not going to be there. And I think that there should be more transparency because there is a genre, there is this section of writing which is the line where fiction and nonfiction meet, and I think we need more transparency about books that fall into that, so that way readers can be making a conscious decision into what they're reading. Colleen Hoover admitted that It Ends With Us is based on her mother. I think it's End With Us. I've never read a Coho book. I saw a few creators feel very awkward in how they talk about the book because of the sort of surprise nonfiction elements. And I think if there had been more transparency, then the readers could make a more effective decision if they want to pick it up or not. Because some people are like, well, if it's based off her mom, I don't want to really shit on her mom. And like, that is from someone who would only read fiction, that makes a whole lot of sense, where you're like, that's her mom. But like, people who kind of like really exclusively read nonfiction and autofiction and whatever this is, biography fiction, they'll slam Coho's mom, because that's what they read. They're more comfortable in casting judgment on real life people because those are the genres they read. Again, I think there's just a transparency issue here. Babel by R.F. Kuang has sort of become my golden standard because she has a whole introduction on the nuances and changes she made in the world of Babel, so we understand the magical realism of the world she built. The introduction to that is very long, but it's very helpful and very useful in sort of identifying what things she changed about world history, so we knew going in what was right and what was wrong. And the best part is, right, if you don't want to read the introduction of Babel and just go in, you can do that. You can just skip it. No one's forcing you to read the introduction. And it was helpful for like people like me who do want to read the introduction, who do love reading those things. There's I don't know if I'm more of a Basque Lieutenant Nun. This is the introduction. This is how much is just introduction and stuff to give you context to be able to understand this. And I love that. I love it when I get introductions, especially because it's like a little like classroom lesson that you get to learn about stuff, and it's great. All of this is to say that I love the idea that Jessica Knoll did. I like the artistic leap. I like what she was trying to do. I just wish I had known going in that the majority of characters and the event itself was based in fiction. I still would have read it. Like, I don't mind autofiction. I read Motherhood by Sheila Heti. I read, what are you called? Outline by Rachel Cusk. I didn't like Taipei by Tao Lin, but like, I'm not supposed to like everyone. There's also Topeka School by, I don't remember who did Topeka School. I read that book and I could not tell you a single detail about that book other than biofeedback was in there, which was weird because I've been through biofeedback, and also forensics. I don't think I've ever been like, oh, that's just not my genre, I'm not gonna read it. I'm such a voracious reader that I'll read anything that's interesting. So like, I still would have read it. I just want more transparency. Beyond that hiccup, the novel concept is very effective in everything that is promised to us from plot to theme in the novel itself. So everything that I've highlighted, the things that are fairly important. You know, Bright Young Woman is the story of two women from opposites country who become sisters in their fervent pursuit of the truth. That sentence there is a promise. When we read this book, we are understanding that we are getting this connection between these two women as they become closer to best friends. That happens. I love that besides the lack of transparency, you know, reading this synopsis, if you like everything in here, you're going to find everything in the novel. It's very good. Alright, Lords and Germs, it's time to actually open up Bright Young Woman and look at what this novel has to offer. Grab your drink, grab your favorite plush companion, and let's get this madness started. You ready? Lumpy is ready. No gods or kings. Only Lumpy. Bright Young Woman has beautiful and evocative prose, which is elevated by the performance of the audiobook narrators, and I do really recommend you do this on audiobook. They do one quote, count them, one quote from Ted Bundy, and they hired a man to voice that one line, and it is a frightening experience. This whole time we have had Sutton Foster and I think her name is Amani J. Powers and Sutton Foster, these two women, have been narrating it this entire time, and we've had a woman's voice the entire time, and then we get one piece of dialogue that suddenly switches to a man, and it doesn't warn you or anything, and it is just a genuinely frightening experience. It made my skin crawl. Stylistically, it sounds like our two narrators, Pamela and Ruth, have sat down for an interview and are giving kind of like a monologue about their version of events. And it works really well because this is partially like a true crime novel where interviews and interrogations are a part of that genre's toolbox. I feel like I'm getting witness accounts, and I love that Jessica Knoll really examined like the important things about true crime. What are the things that are important pictures and interviews, and she was able to emulate those things stylistically in her novel. This novel also implements one of my favorite things, the asynchronous timeline. We have Pamela in 2 different time periods, and then Ruth has her own time period as well, so we've basically got 3 timelines going all at the same time. And basically, Pam and Ruth's timeline work in tandem, despite, I think, being a few years apart. And then when Ruth's timeline has resolved, we have caught up to the present of past Pamela. We understand what the significance of present Pamela and the things that she's doing in the present timeline. Overall intrigue of the first act is like, why is Pamela going back to Florida decades after her sorority was attacked? And Ruth's timeline is used to effectively answer that question, because she goes back in order to figure out something about Ruth. And so in order for us to understand why that's significant, we actually have to know who Ruth is. So I do love that we sort of have this, the asynchronous timeline of Pamela and Ruth, and then when Ruth's story is done, they converge and we go into present Pamela. Love it. So there are a few hiccups in the plot that I don't necessarily jive with, but these are such minute details that it's not even that big of a deal, at least I don't think. The plot of this novel revolves around Pamela on the night her sorority was attacked by Ted Bundy. There's a TikTok stitch that's going around on my For You page, and it goes, what's one thing movies get wrong that you notice that nobody else cares about? And one person said, I don't remember who your name is, I'm so sorry, but they said, and this literally changed my life. It did, the way that they said this. And they said that the media gets SA wrong because it tends to focus on the attack itself and not the aftermath in both a psychological and physical sense. So the horror of trying to be a person again after being a victim to one of the most vile acts humanity has ever discovered. So what I do love about this novel, Bright Young Woman, is that we do not really spend a lot of time on the attack itself. The main focus of the story is the aftermath, how Pamela tries to keep her sorority together and her desire to get justice for the sisters who have been killed or maimed by Ted Bundy. And also how to be a person after something like that happens to you. Another detail about SA is that it doesn't always harm just one person. Every person in the victim's life will not be the same afterwards, because everyone is going to show their true colors in very beautiful but also very dark and ugly ways. Pamela is not victimized by Ted Bundy in the novel. He never attacks her, but Pamela is victimized by literally every fucking body else. The cops refuse to believe her statements. People who are trying to brand Tina as this dangerous woman to not be trusted. The reporter is seduced into like uplifting Ted Bundy after spending months promising Pamela that he would never support that man. Pamela's mom doesn't pick up the phone on the night of the attack, and this is an earth-shattering event for Pamela, because in the wake of the most traumatic experience of her life, she's alone and she's scared, and her mother doesn't pick up the phone. Literally everyone almost all the time is stabbing her in the back or trying to like convince her that the people that are the nicest to her are stabbing her in the back, like Tina. Everyone's like, Tina's evil, and Tina's like, I'm not. And then Pamela doesn't know what to think about Tina. So who can she trust? It's a nightmare of everything that Pamela has to go through, and she wasn't one of the people who got hurt. In the other timeline we get, that's completely about Ruth. Ruth is a closeted lesbian who's dealing with body insecurities and the death of her father, and dealing with her overbearing, unsupportive mother. Her story goes through how she meets and later marries Tina, a woman from Ruth's support group. Ruth really grows as a person, and she begins to love herself over the course of the events of the novel. She has a lot less problems with her own body by the time we get to the end, which we love to see some growth. And also, this growth is not predicated on like, oh, I lost a bunch of weight, or oh, I started doing this, or oh, I started doing that. Nothing physically about Ruth actually changes. She just gets out of a toxic family and a toxic person and is able to accept herself as she is, which I honestly think is very important and a very nice thing to see in a book. And Ruth's timeline ends with her getting kidnapped and then later murdered by Ted Bundy. Now, there's only one person who knows where Ruth is buried, and it's the reporter who interviewed Ted Bundy, but the reporter has dementia, and so Pamela, in the present, she's going to visit the reporter and hopefully get him to tell her where the videotapes are where Ted Bundy says where he buried Ruth. That is why Pamela is going back to Florida. She's trying to get answers. She's trying to find Ruth. And I can't remember if the novel ends with them on the hill where they find Ruth's body or at the actual conviction of Ted Bundy. Either way, the past Pamela timeline follows her quest to put Bundy behind bars and the trial surrounding his capture. Pamela is a witness. The opposing counsel tries to get disqualified because of course they do. Because without her testimony, they can't prove Ted Bundy was at the sorority. And she manages to give her testimony, and this is about where we get the direct quote from Ted Bundy that is voiced by the male voice actor. Is when all of that is through. I honestly, I cannot remember if we end on the hill or if we end there. Either way, it's a good ending. Well-written ending, I should say. I think that Ruth's final chapter was fairly shaky. There's some weird spots where Ruth implies that she knows she's in danger, but she's walking into it anyways. The reporter's betrayal of Pamela and then later developing dementia seemed like the hardest sell to me. I want to know if that's like a real event, because if that is what really happened, if it was a real event that a reporter got an interview from Ted Bundy that nobody could find where he buried a bunch of people and then he got dementia so he doesn't remember. Like, if that is all a real thing, I will take this back. But if that's a purely fictionalized thing, I don't buy it. It just felt utterly bizarre to me, and the only way I would accept that as a plot point is if that is something that actually happened in real life. Because to me, what? When I look at this from a craft perspective, the reporter betraying and then later developing dementia in this way is the way that we justify Pamela and Tina being unable to look for Ruth for several decades. Pamela is only made aware because the former sorority sister happens to work in the same institution that this guy is institutionalized in, and she's like, hey, he mentioned this recording that he has somewhere of him and Ted Bundy telling him where he buried a bunch of girls out in Washington State. And so that is what sort of brings Pamela to start looking around and try and find this recording in order, because that has to be where Ruth is. I don't think we needed to do the dementia. I wasn't sure how I felt about the betrayal because it does kind of come out of nowhere. And the dementia felt really needless. Just put the guy on his deathbed. Dying people admit to the craziest shit when they are moments away from death. And I think it would have been just as realistic if this guy on his deathbed was like, hey, yeah, this video recording exists, and then he croaked. Every character was memorable. They felt like complex humans with amazing qualities and frustrating flaws. Even the fairly minor characters like Denise's mother or the cops felt very distinct. And honestly, good refresher from the last book I read, which everyone kind of melted together into one kind of person, which was a little frustrating. We also talked about, I'm gonna bring this up. We talked about this a little bit in The Cabin at the End of the World, but the way that Pamela reacts when her sorority is attacked is very well written and very good. When it comes to the immediate reactions of a traumatic event, our brains don't always latch onto, like, what's important. It just sort of, like, latches on to something. Oftentimes people focus on what feels like minor or incorrect details, or on something completely irrelevant to the experience itself. So when Pamela finally realizes that her sorority got attacked, Pamela goes into micromanage mode. She is going step by step, waking up the girls, informing them of the events. One girl is maimed, and Pamela gives her a bucket to not get blood on the floor, because there's like this event going on at the next day of the sorority, and Pamela is like, get her the bucket because getting blood off the floor is going to be hard, and we have to be ready for the sorority event tomorrow. Everything has to go according to plan, and we are just going to do that. And this feels like Pamela is caring about the wrong things, that she's helping this girl because of a sorority event and not the fact that her face is literally gushing blood. But the reality is that Pamela does not know how to deal with the fact that her sorority is attacked, that some of her sisters are dead and some of them are maimed. She doesn't know how to compute that. Pamela can deal with cleaning blood off a floor and preparing a house for an event that the sorority is having. Those things, like making sure that there's no blood on the floor, making sure that we're ready for tomorrow, those are easily accessible, easily digestible, easily comprehensible things. Whereas my sorority is attacked, some of them might be dead and some of them might be maimed. That is an impossible thing to comprehend in the moment for her, so she's choosing to focus on something else. And there are just some people who are better suited for a high stress environment, and Pamela is one of them. She's the sorority president, so she has this leadership role, and already in her mind, Pamela knows that she can't panic, because if she panics, everyone else in the sorority is panicking. So as long as Pamela remains calm, even if people think she's a cold, heartless bitch for it, it is keeping the rest of the sorority calm, and honestly, that's the most important part, is that everyone is remaining calm. Even if we feel like her, state and her priorities are kind of sideways, this sorority effectively gets through this night easy because of Pamela. If I could pick apart every character into detail, I would, but this video would be so long and we would never get to publish. So the only other one I'll mention here is Ruth's mother. Ruth's mother is a bitch. Nobody, not a soul is buying this woman a world's best mom mug for Mother's Day. In fact, she probably spends Mother's Day a fucking loan, because that's how much of an awful human being this woman is. She's antagonistic and aggressive towards Ruth's grief over the death of her father. She is constantly standing in Ruth's way on her journey of recovery after he passes away. She's not accepting of Ruth's sexuality. Ruth is gay, and Ruth's own father had willingly bit the dust because he was also gay and couldn't handle it. So, there is just this pattern of destruction that is going on in Ruth's household. If you're not a true crime fan, let me catch you up on why it is significant that Ruth is gay. There's a lot of evidence that victims who have a minority identity, such as belonging to a Native American nation or being queer, they don't get as much as effort put into their cases, if any at all, in comparison to their majority identity counterpart. There's a group called MMIW, which stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, which seek to advocate and put pressure on their police forces to search for these women. A part of Jeffrey Dahmer's infamy is how many of those victims were just not searched for because they were queer. And honestly, I'm recording this video on April 10th, and just very recently, they found a young Native American man dead in the woods with his hair cut off. And it really feels like the police over there don't really care that this was clearly a hate crime. And by the time you watch this, I'm sure that there is going to be somebody else in a minority group that has died. And we are just going to watch the police not care. This happens all of the time. Thinking about why does it take so long to find Ruth? It's because she's gay. She's not searched for because her mother is ashamed of Ruth's sexuality. Her mother actively works against Pamela and Tina because if Bundy admits to killing Ruth, it might reveal Ruth's sexuality to the public, and that's what her mother wanted to prevent. It's vile and disgusting, unfortunately not very surprising. There are just people in this world who would rather have a dead kid than a gay kid. And Ruth's story and her mother are a really great way to confront this reality, to really help highlight just how apathetic people can truly become. It's nightmare. She's a very real, very well written, and very horrifying villain. Everyone talked in a realistic manner. Nothing really particularly stood out of place. Nothing felt stilted. Even events were culled through dialogue. They felt very natural. Nothing ever came off as over expository. Stylistically, the dialogue flows very well with the voice of the narrator because it feels like two people are giving their witness testimonies in the form of a monologue. It's very good. As I continue to do these, there are going to be sections like this that are going to be very short, because when things work very well, you don't notice them, and when they don't work well, they become glaringly obvious. So, like, yeah, I was like, yeah, that looks great, and because I didn't really notice any problems. The atmosphere of the world and the sort of thematic atmosphere generated by the genre and the themes, they're all on point. No detail was wasted on immersing us into this sorority and into the experience of being victimized by Ted Bundy, and then the parents, the cops, the friends, the enemies, the allies, the reporters, the press, literally everyone. We feel the dread as Pamela tries to get justice for Denise. We feel the sorrow when Ruth is just trying to patch herself up back together and is unable because of her mother. Just the existential misery of Tina working several decades just to find the body of her wife, and how everyone thinks that she is this terrible, awful, manipulative woman when all she is a lesbian. That's it. That is when you read this book, it'll say over and over again, don't trust Tina. Tina's not who she says she is. She's this, she's that, she's that. She's just gay. That's it. That's it. You will get angry and upset reading this book, and that's what this book wants. It wants you to get mad that this is the world we live in, and maybe if we start working together, it might be a better place for everyone involved. I mean, just what current events are going on by the time you read this video? What people are dead that the cultural mindset just doesn't seem to care about? Why do people say they care so much about life and yet they turn the other cheek the moment someone is in the ground? It's a frustrating experience, and this novel really, really captures it. It reminds me of when in university we read Mrs. Dalloway, and my professor was talking about how that some novels are kind of timeless in that they circle back into relevancy when events become repetitious. So Mrs. Dalloway feels very relevant in the 2020s not because it happened during the Roaring 20s, the 1920s, but because it's a plague tale. This is a story about when the lockdowns of influenza were over and World War I was over, and everyone is finally being able to reconnect again, and everyone is able to go outside again. The first sentence of that story, Mrs. Dalloway said she would get the flowers. It's indicative that Clarissa is finally healthy enough. She no longer has the influenza anymore. That she's healthy enough to be able to go outside and get the flowers herself. There's a lot of symbolism in that. And that becomes relevant into 2020 because of our global pandemic. And I think this book, even though it was written in very recently, I don't remember what year this was written in, it is about Ted Bundy, right? So the crime era is really the 1970s and the 1980s. I don't know, I would not say it's circling back into relevancy, because it would imply that it became irrelevant at one point, and it didn't. But it holds a modern, relevant sentiment because there is so much discourse about the way that our police systems just don't help people who really need it, and that we are glorifying offenders and we are justifying offenders, and it's just a nightmare, and that's just the world we live in. And so I think that's what I like about the atmosphere of this book, and why it feels so timeless is specifically because every woman knows this feeling. People from minority groups know this feeling because it's constantly happening and it's not going away. And it's so sad that, like, some people don't want the next generation to have a better life. They want the next generation to suffer worse than they did. And it's just sad that that's the state of the world that we live in. Thematically, we're dealing with the way the justice system is fundamentally against minorities and disadvantaged groups, to such an extreme that victimhood extends beyond the victim. It extends to their friends, their families, and other connections. And likewise, victims are not always victimized by the people in their lives and in power who doubt or deliberately work against the victim's fight for getting justice. Violent and often male offenders get away time and time again, and it's still a problem that is happening today, and it's demoralizing that nothing has changed between now and then. Let's talk about fictional retelling of Ted Bundy. Thematically, I can see where we're going with this. We're drawing upon the experiences and the frustrations about this serial killer and his trial. But the question I want to pose to you, and you can decide for yourself, is did this need to be about Ted Bundy? Could we have done a fictionalized story with a killer that is basically a Bundy dupe? Maybe have an author's note or put in the synopsis where the inspiration is coming from. Because while I can see what Noel was drawing upon thematically, I sometimes wonder if we need it to connect it to Ted Bundy at all. Would it have worked, or maybe would the book have failed? I'm not entirely sure myself, but it's an important question to ask. At what point do you abandon the biography fiction and just tell a fictional story with similar themes? And I think the problem that you might run into is what I ran into in reading books that drew inspiration from a true crime that happened in my area. I kind of felt disgusted at those books, not because they drew inspiration, but because they didn't capture the actual motives and mentalities of the event, and the creative liberties ranged from not very interesting to so fucked up, I couldn't believe somebody put that on a page. So I think if you want to do fictional retellings of true crime, that it doesn't work for me if you take too many creative liberties, because these were real crimes with real victims. And if you don't want to wade into the ethical nightmare, then don't use very specific details that are indivisible from their true crime events as a foundational inspiration for your fictional thriller. All of this is to say there's definitely pros and cons to a biography fiction versus a complete fiction with direct and clear communicated inspirations from a true crime event, and that's kind of up to you to decide. Do you think Bright Young Woman would have worked as biography fiction, or do you think it should have been completely fictionalized? Let me know in the comments. I'd really like to know what you think. A lot of the negative reviews of this book, the 1-star and the 2-star reviews, are all sort of saying the same thing, that it did not need to be Ted Bundy. And because the other problem that we have is that I don't know which parts of this book are true and which parts of this book are false. So I don't know how horrified I'm supposed to feel about Ted Bundy, because I'm not entirely sure if anything happened, if the reporter with dementia was real, if there was a lesbian victim and her wife trying desperately to find them. Like, we know the sorority is real, but what else is real? And I think an introduction might have helped me, but it's just, I wonder how successful this book might have been if not attached to Ted Bundy. But then again, you lose a lot of symbolism and theme when you erase Ted Bundy, because this is specifically about the way that America romanticized the serial killer and how it stepped on women that were the victims, and how this helped create an environment in which this happens over and over again, even in the year of our Lord 2024. So I'm not entirely sure. Alright, welcome to part 3, Opinions Aplenty, where we are going to talk about the things that worked, the things that didn't work, case study, all of that fun stuff. So, what worked? The theme is theming. It is the best part of this novel. We get the horrific experience of being a victim, and the way that you're victimized by a perpetrator, and how you're victimized by a system and by the people around you. It is very well thought out, it's very nuanced, and I think it was very successful. Almost all of the characters have well-scripted characterizations that made for an entertaining read. The prose is very beautiful, the tone and the pacing is well executed, the asynchronous timeline worked really well. There's a lot of good that is happening here. The things that what sort of worked, the reporter who betrays Pamela, I can't even remember his name, he betrays Pamela because he's like, I'm not gonna do any pro Ted Bundy pieces, and then he does after having like one conversation with him, which makes Ted Bundy kind of sound like an incubus. Like he had one convo and was suddenly like, Ted Bundy, to pick me. I'm not sure. He kind of worked for me. The reveal of dementia, I just didn't buy it. I think the book where this book struggles the most is specifically this reporter. But it's not so much as a struggle that, like, it took me out of the story. I'm pretty sure I rated this book 5 stars. I'm just nitpicking. Because I nitpick everything. Because I think about novels in depth way too much. And then I'm still on the fence about it being biography fiction. I don't know how to feel. I don't know how to feel. What didn't work, I rated this book 5 stars, so there wasn't anything that just full stop did not work for me. The lowest reviews tend to be fairly against the idea of it being biography fiction, and a lot of people are like, it's in poor taste and it's offensive to the victims, so that is a lot of what the negative reviews are saying. I don't really share most of these beliefs, but I don't have anything to put in this section, so I'm just telling you why other people didn't like it. And I want to add here that I looked, and I was trying to see if victims or victim family members have come out upset at this book, and I could not find anything. And at the end of the day, if they find a genuine issue with this book, I would side with them because they're the victims and they get to decide what is helpful and harmful representation of their own misery. I know that it might be very easy to say that this is offensive to the victims. We want to make sure that we are not speaking for or speaking over victims because that's no different than just blatantly ignoring them. You cannot say it's offensive to the victims if not a single victim gives a damn that this book exists. I did try very hard to find anything of any victim, of any family member of a victim, or anything of them being like, this is demonstrably harmful, and I did not find anything. If you have seen a video, an article, or anything, please send it to me. I would love to see it. But I did try to do my due diligence to see how, like, the real victims and victims' families felt, and I just didn't find anything. So I can't really say that this book is offensive, because I don't know what they say. I don't get to make that opinion. They do. So when it comes to writing, a great way to elevate your writing is to identify the broader strokes of what you want to do, and then go out and read books that attempt to do those things. Part of what I love about reading is that for me, I'm always getting a writing lesson out of it, because this is partially from me being with my degree in creative writing. This is how I was trained to think and how I trained myself to think when it comes to books. It's kind of like the same idea as using like a piece of art as like a photo reference for an art piece. It's kind of the same thing. Like if you want to teach yourself to be good, you kind of have to look at the experts, and in this case it would be published books. With that being said, here are some of the things that if you wanted to case study Bright Young Woman, these are the things that you would be looking at, which is how to do an asynchronous timeline, how to do multiple points of view. If you feel like your prose, if you're like, man, my prose is just not evocative and people don't say it's interesting, or I don't feel confident in my prose, read this book, take notes. It will help you. I would say this is just such a very good case study for very evocative prose and voice. How to write the immediate reactions to a traumatic event. This is another good case study. And if you really do want to write a feminist perspective in sort of a crime drama, this is a book that you would read because the feminist perspective is so important to this book. If this book was taught in a class, your professor would end this lecture by handing out a mimicry assignment. A mimicry assignment is very simple. You just write a short story mimicking the style of the book you read. That's it. So here is your writing assignment. I think for this story, I would want you to write about someone's immediate reaction to a traumatic event and the aftermath of said event. We would be studying the section of the book where Pamela takes charge in the moments right after Ted Bundy escapes the sorority house. I would want you to have practice having your character focus on the details that seem incorrect or irrelevant to the traumatic event at hand. The event doesn't need to be a break-in. It could be a car crash, death of a parent, pet going missing. I want you to focus on the way that somebody just reacts to that immediate situation, and then don't forget about the aftermath. Pamela's mother not picking up the phone, and Pamela's reaction to that is very vivid and visceral. It's time to indulge me. We're at Tag Town. I love Goodreads tags. My Goodreads tags are hyper specific and unhelpful. I read this book under Women in Power because as a reader, I find it very interesting how women acquire, use, and sometimes abuse power in systems set up against them. I don't like seeing it in real life because those women are monsters, but I do like seeing it in fiction. Ruth's mother is the epitome of this, and she'll make you angry. Ruth's mother is the actual worst. I also tagged this in incompetence because the cops in this story are bad at their job. But I think for the first time, the incompetence of the cops are deliberate and thematic versus most books, which the author is like, I need the cops to be dumb because I want my main character to solve it. And that's a frustrating read. But I liked the incompetence in this book because it felt very intentional. I got a new tag on the block. I created a new one specifically for this book called Fact Meets Fiction because there are nonfiction and fictional elements of this book, and I can't really call it autofiction because it's not autofiction. And then finally, probably to no surprise, we have this book tagged under Fragile Men energy. I shouldn't need to explain why a Ted Bundy retelling includes fragile men with a little bruised ego. But they do. The men in this book have the fragilest egos, and they shatter all the time, and sometimes it's just like a little funny that these men, like, Pamela's like, I call him short sometimes, and Ted Bundy hates it. And I'm like, go girl, call that man short. Bruise his I can't believe that's all you need to do. That's it, ladies. Just call a man short. And boom, shattered. Who would read this book? I love this book. I rated it 5 stars. I'm very happy to recommend it. But obviously not every book is for every person. We all have different tastes. But if you like anything on the following list, I would absolutely recommend this book, and I think you would love it. So if you're a big fan of true crime, fictional retellings of real events, serial killer stories, the feminist perspective, emotional stories, or the movie Promising Young Women, you will like this book. These are the things that you'll find in it. Art is subjective, and attempting to assert any form of objectivity onto art is honestly just a waste of time. You can't even say that, like, good grammar is a necessary piece in fiction because there are genres that really value fragmentation, and there are audiences for that genre. I think everyone wants high quality novels. We just have drastically different thresholds for what we consider high and low quality. So whether you love this book so much that it is a hill you are willing to die on, or you hated this book with the power of 1,000 suns, I would love to hear what you think in the comments. I would love to hear your interpretations. That's all for now. The madness is ended. You can go in peace, and we will catch you back here the next time we delve into our next book.